Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to this week's installment of Pagan Problems. We're going to be talking about when the gods force us out of our comfort zones. So I will begin with an old adage. If no one stirs the pot, the soup will burn. Now, pot stirrers are not generally admired or appreciated. The status quo is disrupted, oftentimes beyond repair, and this gets people's noses out of joint because it makes adaptation a necessity. And it isn't unusual for people to fight acknowledging the reality that things have changed irreparably, even though that consistently results in greater discomfort and may even adversely affect relationships with people who have accepted the change. This also invites an element of the unknown into our lives, and that makes us vulnerable. And the fear of the consequences of what this vulnerability could bring is sometimes worse than the reality itself. Nevertheless, the pot stirring is necessary. It needs to happen, both in the literal and in the metaphorical sense. Because, in a way, the human soul is a kind of soup or a stew. There, you have all sorts of elements that are brought together into one pot, and it's just simmering away. And, like a stew, more often than not, we tend to leave ourselves unattended, and we're not paying any attention to what's going on or how things are developing. And for a certain period of time, I mean, that's all right. And sometimes we do need to get a little, we need to get out of our own heads and start looking outwards. But if it's left too long, problems result. And if we aren't proactively seeking to grow, and there isn't anyone in our lives who challenges us, sometimes the gods themselves decide to take us in hand and say, "Guess what, kiddo? You officially have lessons to learn. Here's your to-do list. Get busy." It's been my observation that when the gods do choose to involve themselves, they tend to take people directly to the issues they are the least comfortable with and they are the least willing to change. And the result is that sometimes we are grumbling our way through needed work if we do it at all. Because it's easy to get lost in the fear that of dealing with past trauma and lose sight of what we have to gain by moving beyond it. And it's easy to make excuses about why we shouldn't have to do X, Y, or Z, or why we shouldn't, have to do it right now, let alone in the open where anyone might observe that we are going through this process. It's easy to reject guidance, even if it's divine guidance from the gods, when we don't actually want to change. Even if we need to change, sometimes we don't want to, and the not wanting to gets us into a lot of trouble. So let me begin with saying that when the gods force us to change, and they force us to grow, and they force us to deal with things, this is a sign that the gods or a particular deity loves us, not hate us. And this is important to keep in mind because if we are fighting the change or a lesson or moving into a new spiritual chapter, because it's human nature to dislike anything that makes us uncomfortable, and this tendency can lead us to the inaccurate conclusion that the gods are treating us just as a plaything for their amusement. But drawing our attention to an area of weakness serves a purpose. It isn't about making us feel bad about ourselves. It's an opportunity for us to address the issue, and that makes us stronger, and we earn self respect and we gain self confidence. And honestly, why go to the trouble of attempting to teach someone something if that person doesn't matter? So even though sometimes it's thinking, oh, there's this deity, and they have a lot to do, and they certainly have other devotees, and they took time out of their day to say that I needed to do, this particular thing. It is sometimes it does feel sometimes a little bit too big for us to actually be experiencing ourselves, but the gods decide what they want to do and they decide what they want to prioritize. And if that happens to be us, well, it's a compliment. Even if it's taking us to uncomfortable territory, it is a sign that they care and that we matter to them. And even within human relationships, we do see a variety of settings in which you'll see one human being pushing another in hopes of something valuable being learned from that experience. And I mean, parents do this all the time. They challenge their kids to do well in school, to learn new skills, to try out things to broaden their experience so they can be whole and complete people. And even amongst our own peers as adults, sometimes we have a significant other or a very close friend who gives us some pushback on something that we're saying or thinking or doing. And then that pushback is actually what makes us reassess what we're doing and how we're doing it and why. So it really shouldn't come as a shock to us that the gods will also give us nudges, sometimes quite firm nudges. But the goal is for us to improve. And this is an expression of love. and it helps us mature and gain wisdom, and that makes us better people, and better in our spiritual lives. Now, I realize that what I've been saying thus far, it is a contradiction to the popular ideas that we need to have affirmation no matter what, and positive reinforcement no matter what, and that unconditional acceptance is the only solution, and that all of these things are automatically good in and of themselves. I understand I am going against that. And I want to make it clear there's a place for affirmation. There's a place for compliments and acceptance. But it isn't always the answer. And the reason for that is because when we feel affirmed and complimented and accepted, and that everyone's telling us we're the greatest thing since sliced bread, well, it makes it easier for us to stay in one place instead of growing. We're not seeing opportunities when we can become more than what we currently are. We're not refining ourselves. We're not doing anything that helps propel us forward because apparently here is fine. After all, that's what everyone's been telling us. So, if we have behavioral patterns that stifle us, or even worse, are actively harmful to us, it would be utter madness for anyone who cares about us to reinforce that behavior. And so, the loving thing is for that behavior to be challenged, whether this is coming from another human being or from the gods themselves. Even though it's very seldom that we acknowledge the love within those challenges. Honestly, most of us could probably stand to work on that. Constructive criticism actually is a thing. I mean, all that being said, there is love when someone tells us, you're standing still, life is leaving you behind, this isn't okay. Or when someone asks us the question of, what on earth are you doing? This is hurting you. This isn't helping you do any of the things you say you want to do. And of course, this can be very uncomfortable. But just because a conversation is uncomfortable, it doesn't automatically mean that person is our enemy, whether we're dealing with another human being or with a deity who's saying, snap to it, kid. You need to deal with this. So, this focus on self-improvement, it is actually preparation, and it sets us up for success. So one form that this would take is with us confronting our own demons. There's not a soul on earth who isn't carrying around some kind of baggage, and it gets heavy. It slows us down, and it drains our energy. And the solution is to put those burdens down, if provided those aren't the burdens that it's our responsibility to carry. And we also, along with that burden, we need to cast away any misplaced guilt that we might have for releasing that burden. And when we cooperate with this process, our strength increases. We have a better sense of what is a priority and what is not. And just as importantly, we will then have the energy to carry what we should be carrying. Another common lesson is the need to grow a spine, because we are living in an age of spinelessness, and it has worsened every problem that we face, and it rots away the soul. So bucking that trend and having a backbone worthy of the name, that isn't a small task. It takes development. But history in present day is riddled with examples of the most pathetic and inexcusable cowardice imaginable in all manner of settings, in all walks of life. So this is something that we need to realize as an aspect of human nature that we have a need to fight off from within ourselves. And the benefit of doing the work and making a habit of standing up for ourselves and our beliefs is that it does become easier and less frightening in time. And then when the chips are really down, it's much more likely that we'll have the necessary strength of character to do the right thing and to conduct ourselves in a moral fashion. But if we go along to get along, if we let everything slide, and then still think that one day when the time comes, I will take a stand when it really matters, I would say stop fooling yourself. That's not how it works. The person who speaks up when there's something big and bad and terrifying going on is the same person who was speaking up when things were small and the problems were more manageable and there wasn't as much at stake. You don't build up this spine or this backbone, overnight or in the face of immense pressure. It's by standing up for yourselves a little bit at a time and working up that muscle until this is simply your pattern of behavior and saying, look, I don't care who you are. I don't care what power you think you have. I don't care about what you could potentially do to adversely affect me. I know this to be right or I know this to be wrong, and my conscience is what's going to guide me, not your dictates. Uh, Patterns, habits of behavior, I mean, we all have them. We might as well build ourselves up so that we can act to our own advantage when needs be. Another lesson that comes up often is that we need to have principles worth actually standing on. Now, over the past 2 years, I have become convinced that the vast majority of people, that their beliefs or their principles are just concepts that they give lip service to, and it has zero effect on how people actually behave or on how they make decisions. So the consequences is that the moment that these same people fear punishment, or even just that they'll be subjected to some harsh words, they back down immediately. They duck their heads, they close their mouths, and they conform. So having these skin deep principles doesn't really count. The gods aren't fooled, and neither is anyone else who's been able to bully us or anyone who witnessed us caving into the bullying. So if the gods are putting pressure on us to walk our talk, then we are facing an important test. And so we might also consider what ideas are there that are actually worth facing this disapproval, or worse than disapproval. I'll put it gently, because that's a question everyone faces and has to answer for themselves, especially during disruptive periods of history like what we're experiencing now. And many of the gods do seem to be nudging many of our brothers and sisters along in the effort to prove themselves and to ensure that we are solid in our faith, solid in our ideas, and that we know what's worth standing up for and what's worth defending. And I don't think this is happening for no reason. I don't think this is occurring in a vacuum. So if we need to dig deep and define what actually matters in life, then so be it. We need to know who we are, and that knowledge needs to be built on solid ground so that we can live it. So when we are faced with our deities giving us those nudges or appearing to us directly in meditation saying, this direction, these are some of the things that we may have to contend with within ourselves in order to actually take those steps along the path that the deity is trying to get us to travel. And I would just say, be brave. I mean, this is what faith is for. This is what trust is for. And it's also not just about trusting the deity, but also having some faith in ourselves and trusting ourselves and realizing that we are more than the sum of our fears. We are more than our insecurities, and we are more than our past experiences. If we are getting nudged in a direction, it means that there is something within us that is capable of meeting that challenge. And maybe we just have some work to do to unearth that, or maybe we need to exercise that muscle so we can do it. But whatever it is, I would say that if you are getting that nudge, go along with it. It'll ultimately be to your benefit. So I think that concludes our segment about our pagan problems for today. If you'd like to carry on the discussion, I hope you'll come see us at Blackbird's Brew. There is a link to join in the description box below. And of course, as always, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.